What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with a round two preview for the Hero World Challenge. Played a lot more difficult here for Thursday than literally anybody imagined. I mean, the announcers for the first 30 minutes were trying to make sense of it. We're talking about the scores, how they're used to being like 4 or 5 under at this point. I mean, you saw plenty of 63, 64s last year on Saturday and Sunday pin locations, right? So for the leader to be at just -3, the scoring average to be dead on even par is something that I don't think anybody, even Tiger Woods and the players out there themselves, could have imagined. There's a few reasons for that, or at least I can, speculate for a few reasons for that. So we'll go through that a little bit later on, but I don't think that's really something to expect all week. So we'll talk through it, why maybe the scores were a little bit worse today than you might have imagined, and how it's going to impact play throughout the weekend. So let's get started with that. Look at the golf course. What we did end up seeing today was a golf course about 2.5 shots harder than what we've seen in years past. And when you take a look at last year's winning score of just 18 under par, that was actually on the worst side of the spectrum, right? Typically, we see 20, 22, sometimes even 25 under par winning this golf tournament. So what was the deal today, right? Why did we have an even par average? And why did the first 10 guys end up shooting over par, right? The guys in the afternoon played a little bit better. Keep in mind, it's just a 10 golfer sample size. So we can't look into these numbers too much. That's because of the dampness of the golf course, the amount of rain they've gone over the last week or so. If you take a look at some of the past rainfall, something that I didn't even look at going into the week, you had at least, I believe it was 12 inches of rain over the last month, which doesn't sound like a ton, but most of that rain over the last month has come in over the last 7 days. So it's been drenched. They actually had to cancel the Pro-Am yesterday because of some of the rains that they got. And in a few bunkers around the property, you had standing water, which typically a damp golf course is actually an advantage for these players, but not when it's an extremely long golf course. It's a 7,400-yard track that typically runs out because of how firm and fast it is. So you're, obviously hitting longer shots into greens when you're not getting that sort of rollout. But on top of that, the around the green shots, this is something that Tiger Woods actually brought up today, are especially tricky when you have a damp surface. And it's something that I don't think any of us could have possibly imagined. That damp surface meant that, typically these players were running shots into the banks, able to bounce them up onto the green, that sort of thing. And they didn't have that ability. I saw Jordan Spieth multiple times try to bounce it into the bank and end up short. I know Matt Fitzpatrick tried to do so and then bladed it over the green, ended up going over the other side because he hit it a little bit too hard. And Sam Burns multiple times today was short-sided and couldn't even get the ball into the green, right? Left it short, ended up rolling back to his feet. So the around the green play was a lot more difficult this time around. And Tiger Woods attributed that to the dampness of the golf course. He also talked about how long it was. That's going to go away because throughout the weekend, there's not expected to be very much rain. Tomorrow, there are supposed to be a few showers that come through, but Saturday and Sunday look like pretty perfect days when it comes to the weather. So that dampness should probably go away over the weekend. I mean, let's look at it, right? Just the normal forecast over here, so we can see Saturday and Sunday. No rain forecasted. Sunday, no rain forecasted. You can see for Friday, they're expecting at some point a storm to come through, but it's not going to be any significant amount of rain, right? You're not looking at 2-3 inches, that sort of thing. It's just at some point it's going to sprinkle, right? And you can see they're kind of just leaving it open there. They have a pocket in the morning, a little pocket there around midday, and then in the afternoon, right? They don't even have any rainfall accumulating, right? So they're just essentially leaving it up to be a toss up tomorrow. So at some point it'll rain. If it happens during play, everyone's going to be out there, right? So it's not like it's something that we could take advantage of from a showdown perspective. But the golf course should get easier throughout the weekend. The winds though for Friday. So I'm saying this from the full tournament perspective. So keep that in mind. Tomorrow, right? It's not going to be dried out already, right? It's still going to be damp out there. I mean, if they get rain throughout the day, that's obviously going to add to that. And then these wind gusts are just horrendous. They're about twice as worse as today, right? They were around 12 to 17 miles an hour. Tomorrow, you have between 26 and 31 mile an hour wind gusts. The sustained winds are, I guess, a little bit higher, right? They're there in that 17 to 18 mile an hour range, but they were about 13 to 14 miles an hour when the players were out there in the afternoon. So it's not like you're dealing with a drastic difference when it comes to your sustained winds, but when you're looking at the wind gusts, it's a pretty significant change that they're going to be dealing with. So This scoring average right around even par, at least from the conditions perspective, you would probably expect it to maybe get a little bit worse, right? Maybe be slightly over par here for tomorrow's round. But the good old tour sheet out there, the good old tour officials are going to have something to say about it. Today, they played it to its maximum length. They played difficult pin locations. Another thing that Tiger Woods talked about was because of how wet it was, they had to put all of the pin locations at high spots. And if you know anything about a high spot on a green, that is always going to be by far the most difficult pin location. That's typically where you have tabletops. You're hitting to like the higher tier of a green, that sort of thing. It's a lot easier to access, pin locations that are in a bowl, right, towards the bottom of a lot of those slopes. What you saw today, and I think it was just because of the weather that they had the day before, were the locations that weren't in the bowls, right? They were at the top of them where water and rain isn't going to accumulate. So it's speculative, right? Just like today was a little bit more difficult than we expected. If everyone is going to expect the same scoring average, I don't know if that's something you can really rely on. The tour is going to do what they can to try and turn around the scores. This isn't meant to be like a US Open, right? This isn't meant to be a difficult track where something like 12 to 15 under par wins. You literally always see something like 20 to 25 under par winning. So, now that they're off their identity here, now that you see a little bit more of a difficult track, I think they're going to adjust. I think they're going to make the conditions a little bit easier for these players here on a Friday. So let's head over to the player poll, talk through the guys that I like now, because I'm looking for aggressive players, guys that can take advantage of the conditions. So if you're taking a look at this, the chalk is always going to be around the guys that played well, particularly for round 2 Showdown, round 3 Showdown, right? The guys that played well in round 2 are going to end up chalky. And then, of course, for Sunday Showdown is when all of that snowballs, right? The guys that have played well for the first 3 rounds are mega chalk because now they're starting to get placement points. But even in round 2, even in round 3, the guys that have, started off hot get a lot more steam than they probably should. And I understand the argument from the top level perspective, right? They're playing well, right? You'd think that they could probably continue that. Couple things with that. First off, it's really hard to back up a good round, right? So if you go out there, have a ceiling performance, it's really tough to back that up. You'll hear that both from a round to round standpoint, a tournament to tournament standpoint. It's usually hard to carry that momentum, or even a year to year standpoint, right? You even had announcers today talking about Scotty Scheffler, mentioning that it's going to be really hard for him to back up last year just because of all the accolades, right? For him to go out there, win 4 or 5 tournaments, a major championship, is going to be next to impossible. So there's a legit factor with that. That's the first half of the equation. The second half of the equation is you have less aggressive players that are out there towards the top of the leaderboard, right? When you're in first, second place, up there in the top 5 of a full field event, you aren't going to be nearly as aggressive as somebody that's, let's say, 3 or 4 shots off of the cut line. You have a lot more to lose. From the game theory perspective, you don't have as much to gain if you're going out there and being fully aggressive. And in Showdown, especially when there's no cut line to worry about, we need a ceiling performance, right? We ideally, with only 20 players, need the top 6 fantasy scorers. And a lot of times you're going to need, especially at this golf course, like 5, 6, 7 under par to crack that optimal lineup. Now, conditions are a little bit more difficult this time around, so you might not have to have that true ceiling performance, but you're still going to have 6 golfers that likely shoot -2 or better, right? That get up there in the top 5 or 6 performances. So I would rather bet on the guys that have to move up the leaderboard, that are a little bit behind the 8 ball, because not only are they going to be a little bit more aggressive, but then you're also dealing with lower ownership, right? Typically lower price tag. They come out with the price tags for Showdown about halfway through the round before. So today, I believe it came out around like 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. They dropped all of the pricing. So at that time, the leaderboard, a lot of where players were at that point is reflected on the leaderboard. So Tommy Fleetwood, for example, saw a price increase because he was -3 at that point. Let's see a few big movers on the board. You can see Colin Morikawa, right? You got a little bit of a price increase there. Jordan Spieth, a price decrease because of his score. You can see a Sam Burns, a price decrease because he was +2 early in his day. Ended up -2 because he rebounded there on that back 9. So you're always inherently going to see a lower price tag on guys that started off a little bit cold there, but usually lower ownership as well. So that's carried out throughout my player pool there. So up top, rather than going to a Victor Hovland, right, who obviously had an excellent round today, I'm looking to take some of the pivots. And the pivots are arguably just better players, right? Like a Justin Thomas for $300 more. He's 10% lower owned than somebody that I think is just an inferior player in a Victor Hovland, and somebody that's also higher owned, right? So I'm going to make that pivot to Justin Thomas all day. But Xander Schauffele, Scotty Scheffler both fit that build as well. Scotty, the ball striking was above average, right? It was about Scotty Scheffler quality, what we're used to seeing from him, but he just couldn't buy a putt for his life. On the front nine, he missed multiple makeable birdies. On the back nine, missed a 3-footer for a par, which was extremely disappointing. He's got to clean up the putting. I mean, that was the story coming into the week. But at this point, he finds himself tied for ninth. What is it? Actually, I believe he's what, even par? Yeah, so I think he's like tied for ninth place at this point, which really isn't all that bad, right? He's the middle of the pack after one round. And that feels like his floor, right? He couldn't make anything all day. His ball striking wasn't even that great, right? He had the one eagle where he was able to get on the surface in two, but we kind of expect that from a Scotty Scheffler, right? Him to take care of those par fives, to get on that drivable par 4 and 1, which he wasn't even able to do today. He's got a lot more upside than what he showed today, and his floor, right? The worst performance we could have seen is tied for ninth place after one round. So I like what we saw. I think he's got that upside. Xander Schauffele, a little bit more volatile. He made a lot more birdies than a Scotty Scheffler, but he also showed a lot of rust. He showed that he's not quite as sharp as, at least from the ball striking categories, as somebody like a Scotty Scheffler. But the putter was rock solid for Xander today. So if he can clean it up terms of his approach play, off the tee play, he put himself out of position at least 3 times there in the last 5 or 6 holes. He could post 4 or 5 under par, right? He made enough birdies to do so, just has to keep the squares, the good old bogeys, off of the scorecard there. Moving down into this 8K range, we talked about Hovland already. Tony Finau, I actually don't hate the play. He came in lower owned than I thought he would. I really thought he was going to be like 50, 60% owned this week. And in the contest that I was in, he was like 46 to 48% owned. So I wasn't drastically off, but I definitely thought he'd get more steam than he did. So his ownership projection has gone down significantly, even though he is there at even par. If I was playing more lineups, I'm only playing 3 lineups for Showdown tomorrow, I would likely have Tony Finau. He's like one of the first guys that's not making it into my pool for tomorrow. So definitely somebody to consider. You also got Fitzpatrick and Sungjae. Now, these are your pivots. Obviously, both of them 2 over par, and not a lot of people are going to avoid them because of that form. But if you've been playing Showdown for any extended period of time, you know that it's extremely volatile. These guys are more than capable of bouncing back after a sluggish start, and they're solidly priced, right? They're in the 8K range. They're a third, probably a fourth man in to a lot of the lineups that you're building. And you're getting ownership leverage, right? They're in that 20 to 25% range when it comes to their ownership. I would imagine in higher dollar contests, smaller field contests, perhaps like a single entry 2 to 3 max, that they would actually be even lower owned. You'd probably see them in like the high teens in terms of their ownership, making them arguably even better plays for those sort of formats. Fleetwood played well today. The ball striking looked excellent. And I kind of gave him shit, right, going into the week, calling the European Tour stats a little bit of a, fool's gold, which I still think is the case. But, maybe instead of, gaining, 12 strokes ball striking over his last 2 events, I think that's the headline that everyone's ran with this week with the Tommy Fleetwood. That is more representative of like 5 or 6 strokes gained with his ball striking, which is still great. I mean, I don't know, if I saw any of the other players in the field coming in with 6 strokes ball striking, I'd be pretty happy about it too. So I'm not all that surprised about Tommy Ladd, but he's, in terms of, his form, he's playing well above his expectation, right? Like he's got a lot going for him. It's likely to end up regressing at some point. And I don't want to be there in Showdown if we see that regression. I mean, that's like a blow up around waiting to happen. So I'm going to steer clear. If he was lower owned, I'd probably be there on a Tommy Ladd. But I understand the play. I certainly understand it. I think that it's a ticking time bomb waiting to blow up. Max Homa at -1. He played pretty well today. He hasn't been practicing much. Well, we did end up getting that out of him over there on social media. He admitted that what I suspected going into the week is the case, but he still posted a solid round. The ball striking is always going to be there for Max Homa as one of the more repeatable golf swings in all of the PGA Tour. So he's about average ownership, right? 30% is your average across the board when it comes to your projected ownership. So I have no problems getting the good old Max Homa. Just an averagely owned play that I think brings a lot more upside than your average cat in this field. Tom Kim, great round, 50% owned. I ended up fading him. He's the only guy so far that I felt like I made a mistake on, right? It's only been one round, so it's not like I can condemn myself for making a mistake after Thursday. But I didn't play Tom Kim this week because of the course fit. And you'd think if the course was playing longer today, because of how soft it was, that maybe Tom Kim would run into even more trouble. And he was the only player, guys, to not make a bogey today. So props to Tom Kim. We know he's an absolute stud. It was always within his range of outcomes to have the best round in the field today. It's just that he has to sustain that going forward. And I'd say the one issue for Tom is that he only hit 10 greens today, right? He had a 55% green in regulation percentage. It's hard to have the round of the day only hitting 10 greens. So you know that he putted lights out. You know that the around the green play was stellar. Did not make any mistakes when it came to saving par. And typically, it's hard to sustain that for more than a round at a time, right? I mean, he was the only bogey-free round today. So there's a little bit of run good if you played Tom Kim today in Showdown. I'll say that you probably lucked out a little bit if you played him there. And in 4-round stuff, I still feel pretty good about the fade because he had everything go right for him today, right? Made no mistakes and still shot -3. That was his ceiling. I mean, typically at this event, you see like 7, 8 under par rounds. So I'm not all that worried about Tom Kim. I hate to say that. I hate to mush myself like that, but I'm not. He had literally everything go right and shot -3. Jordan Spieth, on the other hand, had everything go wrong, yet still only, and I say only, shot +4. And you can say he only shot +4 because he had multiple double bogeys and a triple bogey on the card, right? That's +7 right there. Yeah, he still kept it to +4. He had 5 birdies on the day. Nearly made a birdie on the last 2, which would have made it number 6. He's punting it well. We saw that at the President's Cup. At the CJ Cup, he couldn't really keep it on planet Earth with the off the tee play, but he was still going out there and making putts, making those 10 to 15 footers. That's kind of been what's missing from his game for quite some time, right? Like we've been waiting for Jordan Spieth to come along, start making some of those putts that he used to make in his sleep back when he was in his prime. $7,100, only 15% owned. Call me crazy. Call me a Jordan Spieth homer. I'm going back there. I mean, it doesn't matter that he's +4 at this point, right? We're playing Showdown. It only matters about the 18 holes tomorrow. The one argument I would hear against him is the motivation factor. He started off a little bit sluggish last year, and that carried throughout the entire event. He had a sorry round 2, round 3, and round 4 performance, which was capped off by him hitting off of the wrong tee box on Sunday and being assessed a 2-stroke penalty. I don't know. Good old Jordan Spieth, he's capable of bouncing back. And the lead is only 7 strokes ahead of him, right? So he shot +4, worst player in the field, but he's still only 7 strokes back, right? If he has a good round tomorrow, he can legitimately get himself back into consideration. So it's not like he's 20 strokes back after one round, right? Sean 80, something like that. He had a dog shit round, but he's at least still within striking distance. Sam Burns, speaking of a dog shit start, I mean, what is he? He was like +3 through his first 4 or 5 holes, something along those lines. And they ended up -2 by the end of his round. So quite a bounce back. You saw a similar type of bounce back from a Justin Thomas. He was able to take it from +3 back to -2 at one point. Ended up making a double down the stretch, which was unfortunate if you played Justin Thomas this week, like myself. But Sam Burns kept it together, right? Was able to make 5 birdies on his last 9, had 2 birdies on the front 9 too. So he had 7 on the day. You got to like that. And you got to like that, he's not as chalky as some of the other guys that went off today. I mean, look at this. I have Tom Kim for 50% ownership. I have Sam Burns for 28.5%. There's only a 1-shot difference between the 2 players. A lot of that comes down to their ownership going into the week, right? The hype behind them. And then it comes down to the perception of the round. I mean, I think a lot of people saw how Sam Burns started and probably, don't really realize how he finished. I bet you a lot of people out there saw how he started and have completely written him off. But that late run, that late push that Sam Burns was able to make not only really helped me out with my outright market, obviously, in DFS too, but I like the momentum going into the next round. He's a solid course fit here. Loved him going into the week. And now he's only $6,500. I mean, he's just an absolute steal now. Somebody I'll be playing a ton for my Showdown lineups. Cameron Young, he started off with 2 birdies, then a triple bogey on the 3rd hole, which just, a very on-brand start for Cameron Young. Extremely volatile for sure, but was able to make his fair share of birdies. I believe it was 6 birdies on the day. It might have been 5. Either 5 or 6 birdies on the day is what he ended at. So I like the birdie production. I like the putter. That was the issue, right, coming into this week, and it really has been for the last few months. The putting stroke was a lot more efficient today. Let's see. Let me actually bring up his average putts. Second here, I believe it was like right around 1.5, which on the PGA Tour, guys, 1.6 stroke putting strokes per hole is like kind of what you're looking for a player. Let's see what Cam Young was at. 1.33. So he actually improved on that down the stretch. Average putts per hole. Yeah, I think he's starting to figure it out with the flat stick. He's an extremely streaky player when it comes to his putting ability too. I think all of those things are really good signs for Cameron Young. And your outright bets on him too. You guys went out there and tailed me this week. But the last player I want to touch on here that I'll be playing extensively tomorrow is Corey Connors. So Corey Connors, he was +5 through, I believe, his first 7 holes, just an atrocious start. Had a double bogey to get him there to +5. And he ended up bouncing back. He got it to +2, so made 3 birdies over his next 4 or 5 holes. Added in another bogey, I believe it was another 2 bogeys, an extra birdie in there. So he was able to post some birdie production. He was able to make some putts for once, but clearly extremely rusty. And if you take a look at the form, you can kind of understand why. He just hasn't played very often, right? He played at the CJ Cup and Zozo, and it was very average at both events. Before that, he played at the Fortinet, but other than those 3 starts, he hasn't played, right? The only guy that's played less, and these are just PGA Tour starts, right? So Fitzpatrick played a bunch on the European Tour. I don't know. I guess JT, right? JT hasn't played very often. Xander Schauffele, right, hasn't played very often. And then like Corey Connors, like that, and then the President's Cup was his schedule there for the fall swing. So maybe he's got to get the ball striking a little bit more refined here for the second round. The putter looked pretty damn good today, and he's only 8.5%, right? I guess that's the real cherry on top there when it comes to making him a GPP play, is no one wants to get to him because of that round. He's still super cheap. From the course fit perspective, I think he's a sleeper, right? He's got the ball striking, the distance, and the accuracy we're looking for. And on top of that, he's also a pretty good Bermuda putter, right? Compared to his other surfaces, right around a neutral putter is much, much better than his baseline. So good old Corey Connors, I think, is an interesting play for some of these large field GPPs. What we're going to do now is hop over to Draftkings, go through a few lineup building tips for y'all out there. So let's go ahead, bring up Draftkings, and see there's a few comments down there. Jonathan says, glad you held your coin on Prize Picks to donate for round 2. Yeah, if you played on Prize Picks today, you probably lost money. I don't know anybody that won money today. In terms of birdies or better, I think like 2 out of like the 12 players went over. In terms of strokes, I think like 1 or 2 of the players went under their mark. Yeah, if you won money on Prize Picks today, I'd love to see it. I seriously don't know if anybody out there did. And by the way, the reason I can tell you that is nobody was taking unders at this golf course when the average historically was 2.5 strokes under par. The average was like 5.5 birdies made per round. I would love to see it if anybody out there did, but I highly doubt it. In myself, I took an ass kicking today, but that was because the course played 2.5 strokes harder. Again, if you made money on Prize Picks, I'd love to see it. Jack Fisher says, is there a scope for Tom Kim to improve his distance off the tee? Yeah, so Hideki's been doing it. A lot of it's just down to your biomechanics, your golf swing. I know for Hideki, the pause at the top of his swing really deteriorated a lot of his momentum. That's why he wasn't as long off the tee. And now that he's taken that out of his backswing, he's gone a little bit longer. So for Tom Kim, maybe it's a little bit more of a violent, more of a, I don't even know the word for it, like rebounding, right, on the backswing, like the whip of your backswing. If you're a golfer, kind of know what I'm talking about. He's a little bit more controlled at the top, right? He gets to the top of his backswing. It's not like he pauses like a Hideki Matsuyama, but he's very controlled to that point and controlled through the golf ball. Typically, when you see guys be a little bit more free, right, open that up a little bit, they add a little bit of distance. That's what Matt Fitzpatrick has done. That's exactly how he got a lot of that distance working out, right? He's a young kid, right? I'm sure he hasn't worked out that much, right? He's supposed to start working out at like 15, 16 at the very earliest. Well, he's worked out like 4 years in his life, right? So like he's got to get some of that muscle on. He's got a bunch of ways to gain distance. And when he does, he's just going to get even better, because that's like the only thing that he doesn't have right now. And he's 20 years old. Like just imagine when he adds that. Steven says, if they shorten the course, will that enhance Tom Kim's possibilities? Yeah, it would. There's no way to know what they're going with, though, unfortunately. I wish they would tell us the setup. Like, they'll give us the pin locations, but they won't tell us when they're shortening holes, right? When they're like, okay, we're going to use the up tee on hole number 9 today, which is a really, really long par 5. And they do have a few tee boxes that are about 50, 60 yards shorter there that make hole number 9 reachable in 2. So, like, I wish we knew, Steven. But if they do, yes, it would. It would definitely help Tom Kim. Honestly, at short golf courses, Tom Kim's a lock for me. Like, every time we've played this year on a short course, I've been all over Tom Kim. At these longer courses, though, and I think this week's going to be a really good litmus test for it, I think he might struggle. But if he doesn't, like, it's just, I'm even more bullish on the kid. Like, at that point, there's going to be no argument to be made against him, right? If he can still take home a trophy or a top 3 at a really long golf course, like I don't know, like the kid's just fantastic, just one of the best players. But let's get into this lineup construction phase. So what we're going to do here is just make a few lineups together, make a few GPP lineups. We'll make a cash lineup together, just to give you a gist for what you should be thinking about when you're building some of your lineups. And what we're going to do for this lineup here is imagine we're in the largest field contest that you have. So, $15, $20 GPP, whatever they're going with for tomorrow, where you're playing against 2,000 to 5,000 other people. It's not a true GPP where you have 10,000 other entries or sometimes 20 to 50,000 other entries to play against. You still have to consider ownership in these sort of contests. You can't just blindly go out there, play all of the chalk that you want, because you only have 20 players to choose from. Now, if this were a regular showdown slate, right, when we had 156 players for round 2, I wouldn't be as worried about it, right? You could play 1 or 2 pieces of chalk and I'd be cool with it. But if you wanted to start your lineup for tomorrow with, like, let's say all the chalk that you could possibly take. So let's take Tom Kim, right? Tom Kim's going to be royally owned tomorrow. We know that. He's going to be by far your highest owned player. Let's go ahead and put Jon Rahm in there, right? He's going to be like 40% owned. Let's see, I guess a Fleetwood, right? Fleetwood's getting a pretty significant amount of ownership. And let's put Morikawa in there. So you have 4 players here that are going to be at least 35% owned, closer to 50% on the Tom Kim, closer to 40 on a Jon Rahm there. Your product ownership between these players, I mean, let's just do it right here. I'll give you the percentage of the field that's going to have this set of 4 players. So if we're assuming that Tom Kim's 50%, we're assuming that Jon Rahm's 40%, we're assuming that Tommy Fleetwood's 35%, and we're going to assume the same thing for Morikawa. And I know I have my percentages on the other table over there. That's 2.45%. 2.45% of the field should be expected to have that exact set of combination, right? And let's say we're playing against 20,000 other entries, right? If that's the case there, oh, I really messed that up. Hold up, boys. There we go. All right, times 20,000. I clicked the wrong button over here on the phone calculator. That means that you're playing against 500 other people that have that same set of players, right? So 2.5%, I rounded up there, of 20,000 is 500 entries. That means you're playing out 2-on-2 versus 500 other people. And you can see you have $8,200 remaining. And, let's say we'll take Sanjay, right, to try and be a little bit contrarian here, right? And then let's finish this up with the last guy that we can take, a Max Homa. This lineup right here, let's see, we don't even have to take Sanjay. Right? I guess we could take Fitzpatrick, right? Because we have that salary for it. This lineup's going to be duplicated like 200 times, maybe like 150 times, and that sort of GPP, because people are going to spend all of their salary, right? So I guess if you wanted to take these 4 players, like you really, really liked the chalk for tomorrow, right? You're going to have to leave a good amount of salary on the table. Like maybe you take a Burns and maybe you take a Jordan Spieth in this sort of lineup and you leave $2,700 on the table, because this sort of lineup has almost 0 chance of being duplicated. So, I mean, and is there a massive difference, right, between taking a Jordan Spieth and a Sam Burns tomorrow and then going to, I mean, who did we have in there before? Like Fitz and Homa, right? Like, do we think that the talent gap between those 2 players is that much? It's not, right? So I'm always talking about the chalk and how, I don't like playing it, so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that you don't have to play it. If you play it, just please do so responsibly. Understand that on a 20-player slate that you could be duplicating yourself with, like, not just like a couple people in some of these large field GPPs. It could be a couple hundred people Like I just tried to show you with those 4 players specifically. So I guess that's just the main MO when it comes to these large field contests. How I prefer to build, right? So I showed you how you could prefer around, build around the chalk there, but I prefer to be a little bit more contrarian, right? So rather than starting with a 40% owned player, maybe I take Justin Thomas, who's going to be the lowest owned guy up top, right? So we go with a JT. Our second man in, maybe we take a Sanjay here, right? I mentioned that I think that they're going to be much lower owned than they probably should be. And they're really good sources of leverage. They're in the 8K range. We could probably take another guy in this 9K range. So let's go ahead and even put a Tony Finau in this lineup there at $9,000. And now we're left with $7,700. We're starting with a guy that's going to be like 30%, like 20% are owned or less there with a Sanjay in, and probably like 25 to 30% in a Tony Finau. So let's find one more option to make this core 4. So we still have $7,700. Let's add Fitzpatrick, right? Let's go with 2 pivots there in that 8K range. So this start right here obviously uses a little bit more salary. So you would expect, right? So the core 4 that we've taken this time, right, of our 4 favorite players for this lineup, you would think because we're spending more salary that we're probably going to have more implied ownership. Well, let's find the product ownership of these 4 players. So if we're going to assume that JT's 30%, let's do that. Multiply 0.3 by 0.2, which will be Sanjay M's ownership. Next, we're going to multiply it by 0.3 again for Tony Finau's ownership. And for the last guy, let's put 20% on good old Matty Fitz as well. So that product ownership between those players is 0.36. 0.36 as opposed to 2.5%, right? So that means that you have an 8 times higher chance of duplicating yourself with that other set of 4 players. In this set, you'd argue would just be better players, right? I mean, they're more expensive. They're higher quality players than the other set of lineups. So you start here, then you're like, okay, well, I'm only going to have 0.8% of 20,000 people, or sorry, 0.36% of 20,000 people that are going to be able to duplicate me. Okay, how many people is that? 72 people, right? So 72 people are going to have this set, or at least hypothetically, right? That's what we're projecting for. 72 people are going to have this set of 4 people. We don't have to leave all kinds of salary on the table anymore, right? So if we still want to take a Max Homa, okay, that's fine. And then we have $7,000 left. We really want to play Shane Lowry. I'm okay with that because, sure, we're spending all of our salary. So this might be duplicated like once or twice in the large field GPP, but it's not going to be 100 or 200 times like what you had with the other set of 4 players. That's the actual math behind it. And if you ever want to know, right, how many lineups that you're probably going to duplicate yourself with, is just take your product ownership and multiply it by the amount of entries, right? That's like pretty close. That's a pretty good estimate, pretty good rough estimate of what you can expect for total duplications. You want to keep that ideally less than 1, right? You want it to be negligible, right? You to be like the only combination in the field. But you can usually get away with like 20, 30 in terms of a metric on that mark, at least for the large field deep GPPs. What we'll do to wrap this up is go through the cash build. So in cash, I'm not really thinking about ownership at all. I think that Tom Kim is a lock in a cash game. I think that Sam Burns is also a lock in a cash game. You probably want to take a John Rahm. You most likely want to take Victor Hovland. I definitely understand that play. And then here in the 7K range, 8K range, you could probably be a little bit more free about it, right? I don't think you have to take anybody. So let's just put a Fleetwood in there and then wrap it up with a Max Homa. This sort of lineup is what I'd be considering for a cash lineup. I think that the top 4 players here are really like the key pieces. The only guy I would say would be like maybe optional out of these 4 players, maybe be John Rahm, right? Let's say you're not sold on Rahm after his round 1 performance. I don't hate taking a Scheffler on that lineup. You could take a JT if you wanted to, right? All of those guys there, even par. But yeah, Tom Kim, a Sam Burns, and a Victor Hovland, I think that they're going to be at least 50% owned in some of those cash contests. When you're playing cash golf, you definitely want to be on the guys that are super chalky. Let's go over here to Prize Picks. Have they added the golf board yet? So they added Euro Golf. Let's see. They still haven't added the PGA Golf. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. So in terms of a Prize Picks review, that will be on Patreon a little bit later as usual. And I'm thinking about doing a video for it too. So if I do, hey, that'll be posted here on the channel. But that is all I've got for you guys here for Friday's round. If you guys are playing, best of luck with Showdown for tomorrow. If you're playing Prize Picks, best of luck on that side too. And if you guys haven't already subscribed to the channel and you enjoyed the stream, this sort of content, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss anything in the future. Golf is going to be ending after this week, right? For 2-3 weeks until the Century Tournament of Champions. But we'll have you covered for every single event there in 2023. So really looking forward to it. We'll have another Showdown stream tomorrow evening covering round 3. And like I said, best of luck. And let's take home a contest here for Friday and get this weekend started right.